Well, good morning everyone and welcome to our webinar on the changing retail shopper in the spirit of coronavirus. So today we'll be sharing with you what you can expect, how you can prepare for changes in the New Zealand consumer as restrictions loosen up and the economic landscape continues to change. We'll be talking about what it is you need to be mindful of and sharing some tips on how you can stay relevant and keep your business going. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Greg Harford. I'm the Chief Executive of Retail NZ, and I'm joined here today by Natalie Frauenstein, our Retail Operations Specialist. And we're going to work through a few issues over the next 20 minutes or so. Just want to acknowledge, I guess, that this is just a bit of an uncertain time, but we want to make sure that we can do all we can to support our members, not only to survive, but thrive in this new retail environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Greg. And just a reminder today that this is a live webinar, and we will be recording it, and it will be made available to you post the webinar. So if you do miss something, you can actually catch up with it later. Also, do have a look on your screen. You've got a chat function over there. Please feel free to use that. Fire through any specific questions that you've got for us, and we'll do our best to try and answer those for you at the end of the session. And again, you know, we consider ourselves a retail community, a retail family. So if you've got any practical suggestions that you'd like to share with your colleagues out there in retail world, please fire those through as well, and we'll be sure to get those out to everybody as well. So let's get into it, Greg. Really what we're talking about here is mindset and behaviour. We've had some massive change, and it has certainly affected the way we see the world, really. And as human beings, we're very sensitive to change. Greg and I were just joking, he came in and he changed the temperature. And we change these things just by 1 or 2 degrees. So sometimes even little changes can have a big impact on the way we feel and the way we see the world as well. And the truth is, our tolerance for change is actually quite low. That's why we'll comment on the change, just even a small change in things like light or temperature or weather. And so it goes without saying that if our economic climate has changed as well, it's certainly going to have a big impact on us. But one of the other things I know full well as well, and I'm sure you do too, is that as human beings, we are very adaptable and we are resilient. And it's all because we're so wired for survival. So, being a New Zealand retailer, we very much are having to evolve and adapt very quickly because this has been a very fast-moving thing that we've actually seen. So we're really going to talk a little bit about that. So Greg, let's look at the numbers because that's always something that gives us very accurate information. So what are the numbers telling us right now?
Well, first we know that there's been some big changes in consumer spending patterns, and we know that things are pretty gloomy out there for most, not all, but most retailers at the moment. So in April, during the worst of the lockdown, our Retail NZ sales index recorded that sales across the sector were down by about 80%, 80%. So that's pretty massive, and most retailers were kind of trading at about those levels on average over about a 7 or 8 week period. Now, of course, it's been about 2.5 weeks since we moved into level 2 and shops are now open again. And that's great news that shops are open, but spending is still restrained. Consumers are not getting out and spending as much as we'd all like them to. The latest numbers we have are from Paymark, which show that electronic card spending last week was running at a little over 2% down compared to last year. Now that sounds pretty good, but the true decline is actually likely to be higher because those numbers are only reporting on electronic card transactions. And obviously there's a big number of cash transactions, which in a pre-COVID world were happening every day across the sector, but the use of cash we think is probably halved over the last couple of months as customers have raced to embrace contactless payment technologies. So, you know, I think it's probably reasonable to assume that spending is down something in the order of about 10% across the board. Now, there are winners and losers in the retail sector, and that some retailers are still doing pretty well. Some have got customer bases that are still shopping hard, but generally speaking, across the sector, sales are down. Spending's not great, but it is much better than it was. And I guess it is just important to note that while we've seen that boost in sales, it's not closing the gap from that period when most retailers didn't have any revenue coming in. And of course, the real question is, moving on from where we are, what's the longer term impact of COVID-19 on consumers, and what does that mean for future spending? So there's kind of two big things that have happened for consumers at the moment. First are changes in household income. So household incomes are coming down. Many people have lost hours of work, or they've had job losses, so they've got less money in their pockets to spend on discretionary things. And we're also seeing an increase in the number of people continuing to work from home. So not everyone's back in their offices at the moment or in their workplaces. And it's quite possible that we could see a bit of a permanent shift in working patterns as businesses that have perhaps reluctantly embraced remote working over the last couple of months, actually finding that the staff quite like not sitting in traffic for an hour each way, particularly in Auckland. And perhaps there's even some productivity improvements that they're seeing as a result of that. Now, for city centre-based retailers, there's some quite significant impacts from that, because obviously if there's fewer people working in the city, that immediately reduces the number of potential shoppers you can get in the store. We're seeing this most notably in Wellington at the moment, where it is actually very much like a ghost town out there. Government workers have been told they need to stay working from home for the foreseeable future, for most government workers anyway, and that means that retailers have lost significant foot traffic at lunchtimes because people aren't out shopping, they aren't out catching up with workmates and friends over a bite to eat or a bit of shopping. And I think it's true that Wellington-based retailers will be hoping public servants return to the office sooner rather than later. But the issue is not confined to the public service either. We know of businesses in Auckland where office staff are still working at home, and in some companies that could be a permanent change. Particularly, we know of a couple of international headquartered firms, perhaps headquarters in the States, where the businesses there are making a decision that actually they don't need office real estate at all, and maybe they could just keep the people working from home full time. So that could be a permanent change that has big impacts on what happens in central city retailing. Now, of course, if you're a suburban retailer, you might be saying, well, that's actually not bad news because there'll be less being spent in central cities and more being spent in suburban retail. But the reality is that growth in suburbs is likely to be smaller than the reduction we're seeing in retail spending in the CBD. So we're seeing a reduction, even if there's a little bit of an increase in suburban spending. And the reason I say that is because when you're at the office, it's easy to pop out to the shops and it's easy to eat out with colleagues. The social aspect of shopping and eating is really easy to lose when working from home, particularly in a low density country like New Zealand, because most of us are not living in significant apartment complexes with shops and cafes and things on the ground floor, so it's much harder to kind of connect with people when you're working from home. So the impacts of all of this on retail, I think, are quite profound. It suggests that retailers need to be planning on significant reductions in revenue for some time to come. And central city retailers in particular need to be bracing themselves for significant pain in the coming months. One thing I'd suggest is that as a retailer, it's a good idea to cast your net wider by driving more traffic to your e-commerce store to help expand your revenue streams. And good to know too that there's lots of people who typically will be spending time in the office doing their online shopping. So you're still able to access that part of the market as long as customers know that you're there and you've got a great e-commerce offering. And obviously, if you have got a CBD store, try and make that bricks and mortar store, if you can, a genuine destination for experiential retail. Make it somewhere that people really want to come.
Yeah, look, it's been really interesting to actually watch. Just when we were coming out of level 2, my local town centre, and of course I'm not in the city, I'm a little bit out of town actually. I mean, you can hardly find a car park outside the stores, Greg, and I think, we all thought, well, this is great, everybody's back in the stores, but seriously, it looked like, you know, Christmas Eve shopping, people, you know, shopping for like last minute Christmas presents and things. It was that busy, I couldn't really believe it. But I know that that's, you know, like, and probably already has fallen back significantly. So just from your perspective, what other trends do you think we can expect to see in this new economic climate?
Well, we certainly saw when the lockdown was lifted, we certainly saw a big jump in spending and a big jump in foot traffic, especially in the malls. We love to shop and we got out there at the end of the lockdown. During the lockdown, we were forced into making some pretty artificial and arbitrary distinctions between essential and non-essential goods. The point I was making at the time was that every purchase is fulfilling some sort of consumer need. So when shops eventually opened, we had this huge pent-up demand from customers who needed to get things. So people were out shopping. What we also know, though, is that the basket size was typically smaller. There's been quite a contraction in the amount of money people are spending when they are in the store, even if they're still out shopping. I don't expect the boom in foot traffic is necessarily going to last, and we've seen that, I think, flow through in the fact that sales are still down compared to where they were last year. It's true to say, it doesn't need to be said, but the economic impacts of the COVID-19 crisis are simply enormous, and they'll be hitting almost every New Zealand household in some way. We know that consumer confidence has fallen by about 45% between February and April, and household purchases for that same period fell by more than half, and part of that's the lockdown, obviously. But I think that this crisis of confidence that we've got in consumer land is going to get worse before it gets better. Not trying to be negative, and I don't want to be a black hat here, but it's important to think about the fact that there are huge numbers of job losses happening every day, and there are fewer jobs being created too. The number of jobs advertised online is at its lowest point in nearly 4 years, so that's impacting household incomes, and we're likely to see unemployment numbers continue to rise while the number of job vacancies continues to fall. Although it's not directly related to retail, the housing market also plays a key role in consumer confidence. And as you know, housing is really uncertain at present, particularly in some parts of the country that have been reliant on migrant and tourist flows to keep local economies going. But increased house prices over a number of years have made us feel wealthy and have encouraged us to get out and spend on the back of increased equity in our homes. But the expectation now is that there's going to be real downwards pressure on house prices in the short to medium term, and that's going to drive a further decline in consumer confidence. So all of that means, I think, that we're into a prolonged period of recession or depression, and customers are going to change their focus. They're going to be very value conscious. They'll be trading down brands and they're buying cheaper but similar products. And we've seen that with the fact that basket sizes have shrunk. People are going out to the stores, but they're spending less generally. The exception is grocery, where people are going less but spending more, but generally in retail, I think basket sizes are down. I think consumers are also going to be delaying spending across the board, particularly if there's uncertainty about their future incomes and so forth, but especially they'll be delaying spending on big ticket items. So retailers need to be working pretty hard to get customers back in store, essentially through great targeted promotions, catering to those consumer needs and driving a real perception of value. I can't overstate enough how important the value proposition or the perception of value is going to be moving forward.
Yeah, and I know we keep talking about, we're having to have this dual approach to retailing now, not just online, but our stores as well. And I just want to, get back to that whole thing of buying online and the place of the bricks and mortar store as well. By the end of level 3, I think a lot of people just had a tremendous sense of cabin fever. They were quite frustrated about not being able to finish some tasks and things that they'd actually started around the house, and we're quite sort of eager to get out into the stores to get some of those things. And I know you probably think, well, why don't they just buy some of those things online? And there's definitely a certain segment of the population that are never going to be that pro or that au fait or that comfortable really with buying online. So that's where your bricks and mortar comes in, and we've got to make it a really good experience for people as well. There's some people who they really need to engage those 5 senses, and you'll know as well if you've got a retail store, that's one of the things you've traditionally relied on is allowing people to touch, taste, smell, all of those sorts of things in order to actually move them along that journey to make the purchase. The other thing with buying online as well, sometimes there's a perceived hassle factor when you've got a return product. So while that's all good and well, and we certainly promote, having a good, strong e-commerce platform for you to use, don't neglect your bricks and mortar just because you think there's going to be less foot traffic. It's going to become all the more important for people who don't really enjoy shopping online. And there's something else which is completely aside. Online just does not give you that feel-good factor that actually being able to go into a retail store does. There's some really solid research about human well-being and what it takes to make us feel good. And one of those things is actually connecting. And it's not necessarily connecting with people but going into a retail store, being able to connect with the sales assistant gives me a feel-good factor. It's one of the things, if I have a good experience with the person I'm interacting with, can actually push me over the edge to make that decision. Do I want this product or don't I? Just that ability to get out, be in a different environment is therapy in and of itself. It's not called retail therapy for nothing. There's actually quite a lot of solid research behind that. So I suppose what we're saying is yes, certainly make sure that your e-commerce platform is working really well. But this is also a time because people are it's going to be a lot harder for people on a psychological level to actually want to part with that dollar because of all the uncertainty. Am I still going to have a job next week? All of that. So really important that when you're engaging with them, that it's got to be a positive experience for them, and the environment that you create goes a long way to actually helping them step over that line. So, Greg, I know you've got some other research over there just in terms of backing a lot of that up. What else have you got to share with us there?
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. I mean, there's stacks of research on consumers, as you all know, but I'm really interested in some data published recently by our friends at Research First. They did some really interesting polling during the lockdown period, and that showed that half of people were prioritising visiting family and friends, and a quarter of people were looking forward to spending again once the lockdown lifted. And we've seen that flow through in some of the spending that happened. I guess the great news I'd note is that for retailers, a lot of socialising happens in the store. 60% of consumers are saying it's important to get back into stores. There's lots of social interaction that goes on for many, particularly isolated and vulnerable customers. It's the only way, as you say, that they can interact with anybody. So it's really important from that social cohesion point of view. And at the same time, that 60% of customers are wanting to get back into stores. 60% were saying that they would be making a long-term shift to buying products that are Kiwi made.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we talk about sort of, shop local, and we also talk about New Zealand made. And we know, and I think coming out of that same research, it's something like 75% are really interested in buying New Zealand made. But of course, we know that in New Zealand, manufacturing is certainly not one of our biggest sectors over there. And so we are reliant on our overseas suppliers for a lot of products. Maybe you can just talk us through a little bit the differentiation between those two ideas.
So from a retail point of view, Retail NZ has long been promoting our hashtag shop local message. And that's obviously different from hashtag buy Kiwi. And really we're saying no matter what you're buying, it's always best if you can shop locally and support local jobs and local businesses. Now there's circles within circles there, of course, because the definition of local is always relative. So if you live in Alexandra or in Central Otago, your definition of local is going to be perhaps confined to the shops in Alex there, but broaden it out a little bit to Otago. You've got much greater choice on a provincial basis. And then if customers are thinking, well, actually local is New Zealand. New Zealand is my online local way to shop, you can pretty much get everything you need, and that creates great opportunities for retailers to sell while still keeping jobs here in Aotearoa. And of course, it's a bonus if you can buy Kiwi made too if you're a customer. From a retailer's point of view, quality Kiwi made goods are often selling at a premium, so there could be some better margins in those products too.
Yeah, some interesting things over there. What about the whole idea of green retailing or ethical retailing? Prior to this, there was there seemed to be this heightened consciousness of looking after the planet and looking after the people involved in the manufacturing of our products. Is it something that's kind of been shelved for the moment? What do you think is the mindset of our consumers out there?
Look, I think while the focus of many consumers has shifted a little bit, that's very short term. We certainly know that on the back of the climate change debate, we've seen huge interest in sustainability right across the economy, and perhaps at a greater level than it has been at any time in the last perhaps 30 years. You know, there's huge concern out there amongst consumers for the well-being of our planet, the well-being of environment, the well-being of our people, and that's not stopped or vanished. Our customers are still fundamentally the same people, and they still largely want the same thing. So while their focus has perhaps shifted to value or to health in the first instance, and then to value of their purchases, it's still really important to be thinking about sustainability as you move your business forward. COVID-19, I'd argue, is not a reason to be shying away from your sustainability goals. Customers will still be concerned about sustainability credentials, but they'll be simultaneously focused on value. Now, there's challenges in that from a retailer point of view, of course, but there's huge scope for those who can source ethical and sustainable products at a value-based price point to really be able to drive you know, strong customer sentiment, strong customer loyalty, and ultimately sales.
Yeah, and I just want to get back to the whole online thing as well. And the upsurge, especially during the lockdown, was enormous. I think we saw something like 350% increase under alert level 3. I'm sure that, you know, that will, I think we can expect that to continue on. But what do our retailers need to be aware of in terms of their online offering?
Well, I mean, the key point is that we've probably seen a big and permanent change in the way we shop. Online shopping is likely to ease back a little bit from its peak just after the lockdown, but it's reasonable to assume that that pre-existing trend where customers were increasingly wanting to shop online has been accelerated substantially by COVID-19. I think the last full year for which we've got numbers suggested that online shopping increased by 16%, while in-store shopping increased by 2%. So online shopping is growing at 8 times the rate of in-store shopping. My guess is that we've now seen a systemic shift towards a world where maybe 20 or 30% of all New Zealand shopping will be done online on a permanent basis, and for some categories it's going to be higher. The other dimension of that is that unlike previous years where we've seen online shopping growing at the same time that in-store shopping has been growing, I think we're probably going to see online growing now at the expense of in-store, so there'll be more opportunity online, perhaps a little bit less in store. So it's really important to have a website that's well designed for the customer journey, where it's easy for the customer to buy what they need. But equally critical to that journey on the website is fulfillment. If you're selling goods online, you need to make sure you've actually got the goods available to sell and ship, and you need to build a solid relationship with our partners at New Zealand Couriers or whoever your courier company is, to make sure that they can actually deliver on the promises you make to customers about fulfillment times. There's nothing worse from a customer point of view of ordering something online from a New Zealand supplier and having it arrive maybe 3 or 4 weeks after that order was placed. That's not a compelling customer proposition, particularly when they can still get stuff from offshore often faster than that. So it's really important to make sure your domestic courier networks are organised and that the partners are delivering for you. And I really do think that retailers that can provide that seamless online experience are going to be better placed to succeed during these uncertain times.
And just getting back to the in-store shopping experience, we know with a lot of the restrictions around health and safety and having to be careful about stuff like that, we've lost a sense of that, or certainly in certain sectors, like where you can't try more sort of personal products, you know, things like makeup and beauty products and things like that. I'd say certainly it's a time to engage your team as well. You know, brainstorm some different ways that you can actually still be creating a good and enjoyable experience for people coming into your store as well. And speak to people along the way. Ask your customer base what it is that they would like to see. Sometimes they have great ideas, that can really propel you forward. And that's really what retail is about. It's about solving problems for people and giving people what it is that they want to. In all of this, try not to forget rather a lot of those fundamental things. And from my perspective, make it as easy as possible for people to complete their transaction. If I may, I'll just share a very personal little story. Just after we went into level 2 and I needed a whole lot of bedding products, and I'd gone into a particular store and I was shopping up large, but my arms were full. I had the duvet in on one hand and 2 pillows and a throw over my shoulder, and there were still more things I wanted to buy. And I looked around, there were no trolleys around, there were 2 people behind face masks. So already, just think about the scenario. Already I've lost that connection. My shopping experience wasn't easy. So I'll say to the people behind the counter, can I pop these things on your counter? Because there's still other things I want to do. No, you can't do that. I said, can I have a trolley? No, we're not doing that. At that point, they should have been thinking, if they'd understood my mindset, because I was at the point of going, probably got about $500 worth of stuff over here. Do they want my money, or would it have been easier for me to actually go somewhere else? Fortunately, the lovely young gentleman behind the mask and behind the counter, he did redeem himself, and he actually went to the back of the store and went and got me a trolley. And he engaged with me, and it actually took all the agitation away. So don't underestimate the relationships, that personal interaction that you have with people as well. But be thinking about and be training up your staff. How do I make it as easy as possible for this person to part with their money? Because that's essentially what we're needing to do.
Yeah, and I think it's also just worth thinking about the restrictions that you might have in store at the moment, specifically around COVID-19, and just doing a bit of a sense check about what's happening in the broader retail community as well. So, Natalie, you had a situation where trolleys weren't available for COVID-19 reasons. The contrasting situation to that is that some supermarkets are requiring their customers to have a trolley for COVID-19 reasons. So, from the customer's point of view, there's a disjunction there, and it doesn't always flow. So, I'd suggest talk to your neighbours, find out what else is happening in the local retail scene, and it'd be great to kind of agree on some protocols that might be putting in place locally.
And more than anything, put yourself in your customer's shoes. That's have empathy for the person who comes in. The easier you make it, the more willing that customer is actually going to be to part with their money. And at this point in time, I think as retailers, that's really what we want to see and what we need. And Greg, you've touched on it before, but value add. Think of things, come up with new ideas that you can create value, or even if it's perceived value add, that people can actually feel like that they're getting that value for money. And it's about wooing people to buy. Make it easy and give them value for money, because I think right now, with money being scarce for a lot of people out there in our communities, the more bang for the buck that they can get, the better as well. So again, really trying times. I don't think we're going to, for a long time anyway, our landscape's not going to look like what it did in the past. So, Greg, is there any further advice you've got for our members out there?
Look, my key message really to everyone at the moment is just stay strong and be constantly reviewing your business to take account of the changing customer. Really be encouraging everyone to look at product mix, look at team, make sure you've got the right resourcing in place, and make sure everything is focused on delivering sales and maximising efficiencies, because those retailers that can be nimble and flexible are the ones that are going to succeed through this. So if you need extra support, do get in touch with Retail NZ team by emailing advice@retail.kiwi, that's advice with a C, and the team is really happy to try and help you out, particularly if you've got questions about restructuring or something.
Yeah. We've actually got a few questions over here, Greg. What is the biggest issue across the sector at the moment?
I think the biggest issue that I'm hearing from members about is just about survivability. It's really challenging for retailers who've had almost no cash flow for a couple of months. They've got significant fixed costs that they've still been incurring over the period of the lockdown. And of course, margins, as everyone on this call knows, in retail are extraordinarily tight. So it doesn't take too much to tip businesses over the edge. I know a lot of businesses are looking very closely at whether they need to restructure their teams to reduce hours or to reduce staff numbers to save costs. That's something that I think is very topical at the moment. We're getting a lot of calls on that.
Yeah. Another question over here is, what is Retail New Zealand doing in terms of lobbying government for support?
We've been pretty active over the last few months, really, in trying to engage with government on a range of issues. I've had frequent contact with ministers and officials talking about a range of issues, ranging from kind of, what's essential to non-essential. The extension of the wages subsidy announced in the budget a week or so back was pretty disappointing for retailers, and I've been trying to get that message through to ministers that they need to go further than they have. We're still lobbying on rent relief, commercial rent relief, some sort of protocol around that for landlords, and of course cost of payments is something that we're keeping a very close eye on as well, and trying to encourage everyone to reduce those payment costs in the longer run. And I see there's just another question that's popped up there, Natalie. Is there any signs of government interactions with landlords, government intervention, I think, with landlords on rent deductions? So the government has been very slow to deliver on that for the retail sector, and there are other sectors and associations who we are working with to try and push that further. Our understanding is that New Zealand First is the roadblock to that. They are concerned about the impacts of any government regulation on quote, the sanctity of contract law. Government interferes with contracts all the time, of course, so I don't think that necessarily holds true. And it's something we're continuing to push on, particularly Grant Robertson say yesterday that the government was still looking at the issue, but I don't have anything to report on that as yet.
Cool. We've got one more question there, Greg. I need to restructure my team. Have you got any advice for me?
Yeah, look, restructuring your team either to reduce the hours that you're employing people, reduce the headcount, or perhaps even reassigning roles is always a challenging and difficult task, and it's never pleasant. I guess the key advice I'd give you is you need to make sure you're following good practice. You trip yourself up if you don't have a really good process in place to make sure you're consulting your team before you make decisions. You need to seek their feedback, get their input, and then think about that before you make decisions. Retailing New Zealand's advice service is there to help members through these kinds of processes, so do ring us if you've got specific questions or a specific situation, and I think we're going to look to put together a specific webinar on restructuring issues sometime over the next week or so.
Absolutely, there's just been so much question about that. It's so unfortunate really, but yeah, it's really important that we do that well, because the repercussions can be quite serious if we don't. So certainly from our perspective, we want to make sure that you've got a really easy to follow an implementable process that you can use to work through that. Cool, so yeah, that's probably, I think we've answered the questions that are up there. It's probably about all we've got time for at the moment. Yeah, and just once again, just a reminder, if you've got specific questions you want to speak to somebody on the advice line, feel free to give us a call, 0800 472 472. That email address again is advice, advice@retail.kiwi. And yeah, I suppose just from our side, we wish you all successful retailing, and yeah, as you said, we're all in this together and we'll get through it at some stage. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and we wish you well.
All right, thank you.